You said something at the end of the subtle art. It was one of my favorite chapters I've ever read in my entire life, which was that it's important and productive to always be contemplating your own mortality and know that at any given moment you could die, someone that you love can die, and it all can just end.
Yeah.
You told a story where you went to the edge of a cliff and stood there for a while. And you also said on a podcast that you have like a fetish for standing at the edge of very steep cliffs where a slight breeze or a little gust of wind could push you off to your death.
Yeah.
Is this true? Like,
yeah. Yeah, it's much the consternation of my family.
Yeah.
I've done it less lately as I've gotten older. And I try to, I'm a little bit of an adrenaline junkie, but yeah, there's just a rush that comes. I've got this, one of my favorite photos of myself is me sitting at the edge of the Grand Canyon on a cliff that's probably 1,000 feet up and just looking out over it. And I don't know, I feel so alive in those moments. And I had a number of people close to me die at a young age. And so it forced me to confront it forced me to confront mortality probably earlier than most people are forced to confront it. And I found at a pretty young age that it's one of the few things that clarifies what's important to you. Because and again, this kind of comes back to the point about Gen Z and social media. Like when you're exposed to such a breadth of information and everything is relative to everything else, right? So this thing here seems important or less important because this thing seems more important. There doesn't seem to be any solid ground to judge everything by. And I found that the only thing that seems absolute and unnegotiable is that you're going to be dead someday. And once you realize that, then you say, okay, dead one day, what are the 3 things that I care about? And that starts this process of clarification of like, okay, like separate what matters from all the noise. So in Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth, he says, obviously, every experience, everything that happens to you, everything that you go through is an opportunity for spiritual realization. And you're going to have so many opportunities throughout your life, and you can realize more and more at different ages. But if you've missed out to be self-actualized or whatever throughout your entire life, you have one final window of time right before you die. You're lying on your deathbed, and you think like, oh, what are the things that actually matter to me? What are my values? You can base it off of that, which I found really interesting. I'm curious to know, how do you contemplate mortality and your own existence and knowing that you're just a speck of dust without becoming a nihilist in a bad way? I feel like, I mean, you've talked about this a lot. You call it the uncomfortable truth, right? The fact that you are meaningless and you're just nothing, right? Yeah. How do you not see that and become like, it's all for nothing. I'm just going to sit back, play video games because that gives me those quick dopamine hits. Yeah. So maybe this is where Tate actually comes in handy. The answer is because that's not useful. There are 2 ways to look at nihilism. One is nothing matters. We're all going to die. So whatever, might as well like do a bunch of coke and blow all your money or whatever. The other approach is nothing matters. We're all going to die. So there's no reason to not do the best things possible for yourself and others, right? Like we all have a limited amount of time in existence. Our consciousness has a limited amount of time in existence. So we might as well try to optimize that time as much as possible for happiness, love, and well-being. And there are obviously behaviors that are better for optimizing that than others. It's kind of this double-edged sword. There's no reason to do it, but there's also no reason to not do it. And this is recently, it's funny, when I was on tour for this book, because that's largely what this book is, an audience member came up to me and he said, this is called optimistic nihilism. And I was like, what? And he's like, Google it. It's like, there's a small community of people. And sure enough, it's kind of this idea of optimistic nihilism that, yeah, if nothing means anything, then you have no excuse to not get up and fucking do good things and take care of people and tell people how you feel about them and give everything, every moment you have.
So why aren't more people doing that then?
Fear, avoidance.
It's the uncomfortable truth, Greg.
See, I think
uncomfortable.
Well, uncomfortable. I think people are just too comfortable. I think people are getting too comfortable with having so many options. I think the baseline for what we need to live is almost provided in a sense. Like you had mentioned before that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, 100 years ago, it was like getting food on the table, finding a place to sleep at night,
Yeah.
finding a partner. Like if you could do a few basic things, you're set.
That's
Yeah.
meaning too. It's fulfillment
Yes.
and purpose.
Yes.
So it was very clear that if you did these things, you would be happy, you'd be content, you'd be satisfied with it. But now there's so many different options, so many different distractions that you're comfortable, so comfortable, in fact, that you never even try because it's
Yeah.
like you already got what you kind of need.
A lot of modern luxury is designed to help us avoid the uncomfortable but important things we need to think about, right? Like our death or a loved one's death or some sort of tragedy that might happen in the future. Like we don't like thinking about those things, so we distract ourselves and find ways to avoid them. And I think there's a very strong argument that the conveniences of modern living make that avoidance or distraction simpler. And so it's harder for some people. It's going to be more difficult to come to terms with these questions.
You said that when you're no longer like needing physical needs like shelter, food, water, just basic things for survival, a lot of the times your purpose and your meaning will go away. So it turns from like physical struggles to like existential struggles. And you also mentioned the year after you sold the subtle art and it like blew up, did extremely well, exceeded expectations by I don't even know how much. You had your own existential crisis and it was one of the worst years of your life.
Totally. I was super depressed that year, which is weird because I just experienced the greatest success in my career. Yeah.
Okay,
right?
but you wrote the book, right? Which,
But you know what?
Which kind of
I could say to that, it's hard to top that. When you get to a certain point, it's like,
Absolutely.
how do I do even more than this?
right. I get that, but you also wrote the book, which kind of should have been used as a tool to solve that existential crisis. Why do people know what is good for them, but they don't do it? I am so tired of people coming to me for advice, whether it's financial, not actual financial advice, but just how do I set up a budget? And I can tell them, and I tell them exactly how to do it, and they don't do it. They know it's right.
Yeah.
Why do people know they should break up with their toxic girlfriend, but they don't do it?
Yeah.
Why do people not do the things they know they're supposed to do?
It's hard. It's painful. It's uncomfortable. They have to confront and deal with a bunch of emotions they're not used to confronting or dealing with, which comes back to the argument of get good at dealing with bad things. Like that's the muscle to lean into, to practice. It's like knowing exactly how to lose 20 pounds, but not going to the gym. And I ate a big dose of humble pie after that book came out because it's like, oh yeah, you think you're a smart motherfucker. Like here you are sitting on the couch playing video games all day, like not knowing what to do with your life. I mean, Graham nailed it though. Like there's one thing that it gave me an appreciation of is that there's something to be said about always having something better in mind for the future, right? It's like, okay, you know, this project that we did was good, but the next one's going to be even better. And that works throughout an entire career or even personal life until you get a win that's so massive and so inexplicably off the charts that you're like, okay, there's no way, you know? And then you have to confront the fact of like, oh, now everything I do going forward is going to be less successful than this.
Or compared to that.
Yes, totally. So that was very hard to deal with and hard to swallow. And you know what's funny? The worst thing about it too is that, you know, you just made millions of dollars and you're depressed, and like obviously everybody in your life thinks like you must be so happy, like this is the best thing that's ever happened to you. So you don't feel like you can complain to anybody. Like you don't feel like, I felt like an idiot talking to anybody about it, which made it even worse, right? Because if you're depressed, the number one thing you should do is go talk to somebody. And it wasn't until I remember I was hanging out with a friend in New York who was a really successful startup founder and had sold his business for 9 figures a couple of years prior. And he asked me, he was like, oh, how you been doing? Like, how's the book success going? And I was like, oh, it's been amazing, blah, blah, blah. This happened. He's like, no, but really, like, how's it been going? And I was like, honestly, man, I'm pretty fucking lost, pretty depressed. And he's like, yeah, I get that. He's like, selling my company, it's like one of like the worst years of my life. Like I had no idea what to do. He's like, I still don't know what to do. I was like, God damn, all right.
Well, I think people really like progress. Like it's a lot
Yes.
better to go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4
Yes.
than like 1, 2, 10 back to 2.
Yeah.
It's a big change.
Well, also, I bet you probably thought that that was going to be the most amazing thing ever, right? Like you built it up and then you actually achieve it and you feel probably exactly the same as you did yesterday. And you're like, oh, okay. So like,
That's the problem too, is that you hit all these dreams that you've had and you wake up and your farts smell just as bad and you're just as hungover or tired and your wife is complaining about dirty dishes. Like you're like, wow, nothing changed. Absolutely nothing changed.